My name is Maya Jackson. I'm 32. At my sister Chloe's wedding reception, I gave my name to the staff, but they just looked confused. Sorry, the woman said. Your name isn't on the list. Shocked, I found my mother, Denise. She just smirked. Did you really think you were invited? Strangers aren't allowed. I smiled calmly. Then I'll live like a stranger. And I walked away. But during the ceremony, my mother's phone started ringing nonstop. Before I share the rest of this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever been made to feel like an outsider by your own family, hit that like and subscribe button, because you will not believe what happened next. The ballroom at the Four Seasons in Atlanta was aggressively opulent. It looked less like a wedding and more like a corporate takeover celebrating itself. Towering centerpieces of white orchids and crystals dripped onto tables covered in shimmering gold linens. This was my sister Chloe's world now, funded entirely by her new fiancé, Ryan Peterson. This was the world my mother, Denise, had desperately clawed her way into for decades. I stood at the entrance, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest. My simple, elegant navy silk dress, which I had bought from a small boutique, felt like a librarian's uniform in this sea of sequins and designer labels. This was the uniform of the Atlanta Black elite, a world of appearances and status, a world I had actively avoided since I left home for DC. I had chosen a different path, a quieter one, working as a government accountant. In my family's eyes, that made me boring, a failure. I spotted my Aunt Vi across the room. She saw me, her eyes widened for a split second, and then she gave me a tight, disapproving smile before deliberately turning her back. I took a deep breath. I was only here to show I was making an effort, to prove I was not the difficult one they all claimed I was. I walked up to the grand registration table, a massive block of polished mahogany, where two staff members managed the guest list on glowing iPads. A young woman looked up, her smile bright and relentlessly professional. Welcome to the Peterson-Jackson wedding. May I have your name, please? Maya Jackson, I said. Her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Her fingers tapped on the screen. She frowned, scrolling. I'm sorry, ma'am. What was the last name again? My stomach clenched. Jackson. Jackson. Maya Jackson. I'm the bride's sister. The staffer's professional calm shattered. She looked genuinely panicked. This was clearly a situation her training had not covered. One moment, ma'am. She whispered urgently to the other staffer, who gave me a quick, horrified glance before disappearing into the ballroom. I stood there, alone. The line behind me was growing. I could feel the eyes of other guests, the whispers starting up like snakes in the grass. Can you believe it? That's Denise's other daughter, the accountant one. How embarrassing. My brain couldn't process the words. Sorry, not on the list. It felt like a physical slap, the heat of it radiating across my cheeks. That's impossible, I stammered. My voice sounded small, thin. The professional smile on the staffer's face didn't waver, but her eyes were cold, indifferent. Could you please check again, maybe under Monsieur Jackson? I am Maya Jackson. I'm Chloe's sister. I emphasized the word sister. Surely that was the magic password. Surely this was just a clerical error, a simple oversight. The staffer typed again, deliberately slow this time, as if dealing with a difficult child who couldn't understand simple instructions. She shook her head. No, ma'am. There is no Maya Jackson on the master guest list, the family list, or the vendor list. The line behind me was growing audible. The whispers started. I saw the staffer discreetly tap her earpiece. A moment later, a tall man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, Mr. Henderson, the hotel's event manager, glided over. He had the kind of polished authority that made you feel insignificant just by proximity. Is there a problem here, ma'am? His voice was smooth, but his eyes were sharp. The staffer quickly explained the situation. This woman is claiming to be the bride's sister, but her name is not on any list. Mr. Henderson turned his full attention to me. Your name again? Maya Jackson. I am the bride's sister. This is just a misunderstanding. He looked at his own tablet, scrolling once. He didn't even pretend to search hard. I'm afraid my staff is correct. Your name is not here. We have strict security protocols for this event. If you are not on the list, I cannot allow you entry. The finality in his voice stole my breath. This wasn't an error. This was a decision. The whispers from the line grew louder. I recognized the voices, my cousins, my aunts. Oh, look, it's Maya. What is she wearing? Did she come straight from the library? Denise must be having a heart attack. Of all the nights for Maya to pull one of her stunts. I heard Aunt Vi's sharp, cutting whisper to my Uncle Reginald. I told Denise this would happen. You can't just expect the strange daughter to know how to behave at an event like this. She has no social awareness. My father's cousin chimed in. She looks just like she did at the Christmas party. Always awkward. Always in the corner. Honestly, it's embarrassing. Embarrassing. That was the word. My presence was an embarrassment. My existence was an inconvenience. I need to speak to my mother, I said to Mr. Henderson, my face burning, but my voice hardening. I need you to call Denise Jackson, or Chloe Jackson, now. Mr. Henderson looked like he was about to refuse, but the sight of a scene brewing in his pristine lobby made him reconsider. One moment. He spoke into his radio. We need the mother of the bride at the registration table, immediately. A moment later, my mother, Denise, swept into the lobby. She was not just wearing a dress, she was wearing a statement. It was a custom-made, floor-length gown of deep emerald green that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. Diamonds dripped from her ears and throat. She looked incredible and she knew it, but her face when she saw me was a mask of pure, cold annoyance. Honestly, she snapped, not at me, but at Mr. Henderson. Can you not handle one minor issue without dragging me out here? I am the mother of the bride. Mrs. Jackson, the manager said smoothly, this woman states she is your daughter, but she is not on the guest list. My mother finally turned her gaze to me. It felt like being assessed by a tax auditor. Oh, Maya, she sighed, the sound exasperated, as if I had just spilled juice on her white carpet. I really thought you were smart enough to understand the situation. My blood ran cold. Understand what? Mom, I'm not on the list. Just tell him it's a mistake so I can come in. She let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was a sound of disbelief. A mistake? Maya, sweetie, there is no mistake. Did you really think you were invited? I physically recoiled. The guests still in line behind me fell silent, all of them now openly listening. I'm your daughter. I'm Chloe's sister. And that, my mother said, stepping closer and lowering her voice to a vicious whisper, is precisely the problem. Ryan and his family are important people. His father is a state senator. His uncle runs a hedge fund. This is an A-list event, Maya. This is Chloe's future. She paused, her eyes raking over my simple navy dress, my minimal makeup, my quiet demeanor. I saw her disapproval flash, sharp and familiar. We simply cannot afford to have your awkwardness ruining the night. We can't have you hiding in a corner looking miserable, or worse, trying to talk to people you don't know. The word awkwardness hit me like a physical blow. Suddenly, I was 16 again, at my parents' anniversary party. I had been so nervous trying to help, and I'd stumbled, sending a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the floor. I remembered my mother's face, twisted in rage, hissing at me in the kitchen. You are a clumsy social liability. You just embarrassed me in front of everyone who matters. And here she was again, 20 years later, saying the same thing. I wasn't her daughter. I was a liability. Just then, the main doors to the pre-function area opened, and my sister Chloe emerged, followed by her groom, Ryan Peterson. Chloe was breathtaking. Her dress was a cloud of imported lace and satin, rumored to cost over $30,000. Her hair was swept up in an intricate style woven with tiny diamonds. She was glowing, the perfect bride, the absolute center of her own universe. She saw the scene in the lobby, me, our mother, the event manager, the staffer, the line of staring guests, and her radiant smile wavered for only a second before transforming into a mask of exaggerated concern. "Oh my goodness, Maya," she exclaimed, rushing over, her massive dress rustling. "What's happening? Why are you still out here?" Before I could answer, my mother spoke. "Chloe, darling, I'm handling this. Your sister seems to think she was invited tonight." Chloe stopped, her hand flying to her mouth in a perfect gesture of surprise. "Oh, Maya, no! You didn't get my email?" I stared at her, my mind numb. "What email?" "I didn't get any email, Chloe." "Oh, I knew it," she said, turning to our mother with a frustrated look. "Her email is probably still the old college one. I told you I should have called." She turned back to me, her voice dripping with pitying sweetness. "Maya, I sent you an email weeks ago. I explained everything. I told you that with Ryan's family and all the senators and business partners coming, this was going to be an incredibly high-pressure social event. I told you I didn't want you to feel overwhelmed or uncomfortable. You know how you get in large crowds, you just shut down. I was trying to protect you from that." It was the most brilliant, cruel lie I had ever heard. She had taken my social anxiety, a vulnerability she and my mother had fostered my entire life, and twisted it into a weapon. She hadn't just excluded me, she had reframed her cruelty as an act of kindness. "I didn't get an email," I repeated, my voice flat. "I check my email every hour, Chloe. You never sent one. You just didn't invite me." "Maya, don't be difficult," Chloe sighed, dropping the sweet facade for a moment. "Why would I lie? I'm just trying to spare your feelings. I knew you wouldn't enjoy this. This isn't your kind of scene. I was going to have a separate, quiet dinner for you later. Just family." "Just family," I echoed. "But I'm not on the family list." That's when he stepped forward. Ryan Peterson, my sister's groom. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a custom tuxedo, with the kind of confident, easy smile that charmed everyone. He was handsome, white, and radiated the effortless privilege of old money. He placed a proprietary hand on Chloe's arm, silencing her. "Listen, Maya," he said, his voice smooth and condescending, like he was explaining a complex financial deal to someone he knew couldn't possibly understand. "Let's just be practical here. This isn't just a wedding. This is a networking event. This is a merger of two very important families." He gestured vaguely at the opulent lobby, at the guests still trickling in. "Chloe is under an immense amount of pressure. Her mother is. I am. The last thing she needs tonight is the added stress of having to babysit her older sister. Babysit." The word hung in the air, thick with insult. He didn't even know me. He had met me twice, both times at crowded family dinners where I had been polite and quiet. And now, this stranger was barring me from my own sister's wedding, painting me as a burden. Before I could even find the words to respond to him, my mother stepped forward again, placing her hand on Ryan's arm, as if to say, "Don't worry, darling, I'll handle this." She looked at me, her face devoid of any warmth, any maternal softness. Her expression was hard, final. "Let's be perfectly clear," Denise said, her voice low and cutting, "so there are no more misunderstandings." She leaned in, her expensive perfume choking me. "Strangers aren't allowed at this event, Maya, and you have made yourself a stranger to this family for a very long time. You chose your quiet little government job in DC. You chose to be different. You chose to be less. Now go," she commanded, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Go home. Do not make a scene. Do not embarrass Chloe. Do not embarrass me any further." And that was it. The final cut. I wasn't just uninvited. I was a stranger. An embarrassment. A liability to be discarded. The humiliation was so complete, so profound, that it went beyond tears. It was a cold, sharp, clarifying shock. I looked at the three of them standing there, my mother, my sister, and this man who was now more family than I was. They were a perfect, united front. And I was out. Strangers. The word echoed in the opulent lobby. My own mother had called me a stranger. I looked at her, at the woman who had packed my lunches and read me bedtime stories, now looking at me with the same cool dismissal she reserved for incompetent household staff. And in that second, it all made sense. A kaleidoscope of memories, small cuts I had ignored for decades, flashed through my mind. I was 12. It was the Thanksgiving family dinner. I had been seated at the kids' table, which was fine. But then my 14-year-old cousins were moved to the main table, and I was left sitting between my 8-year-old and 6-year-old cousins, listening to my mother tell the table. "Oh, Maya prefers it there. She's just so shy." I wasn't shy. I was just invisible. I was 15. My mother had forgotten my birthday. Not just the date, but the entire event. We had a quiet dinner of leftovers. 2 weeks later, she threw an extravagant Sweet 16 preview party for Chloe, who was only 14 at the time, complete with a DJ and a custom-designed dress. "Just to start planning," she'd said. I was 9. I remembered waiting on the curb after my choir recital. All the other parents had come and gone. The sun had set. The janitor was locking the school gates when my mother finally pulled up, not with an apology but with an exasperated sigh. "Maya, I had to take Chloe to her ballet fitting. You really need to learn to remind me about these things." One by one, the memories stacked up. Decades of being the afterthought, the quiet inconvenience, the daughter who just wasn't quite right. Not as pretty as Chloe, not as charming as Chloe, not as socially valuable as Chloe. And standing there in that lobby, the profound, lifelong hurt didn't just disappear. It did something else. It crystallized. It hardened. The burning shame in my cheeks cooled, and a strange, terrifying calm settled over me. They weren't just excluding me from a wedding. They were simply stating a fact that had been true my entire life. I was a stranger. The tears I thought would come never did. The shaking stopped. I lifted my chin and looked directly into my mother's eyes. The fake pity in her expression faltered, replaced by confusion at my sudden stillness. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was small, sharp, and cold. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the lobby's quiet hum. "I am a stranger." Denise's face tightened. This was not the reaction she expected. She expected tears. She expected begging. She expected a scene. I gave her none of it. I just held her gaze and added, "Then I'll live like a stranger." I turned, my back straight, and walked away from them. I didn't look back. I didn't acknowledge the hotel manager, who was now quietly directing the other guests into the ballroom, trying to smooth over the scene. I simply walked toward the main guest elevators, my heels clicking evenly on the marble floor. Behind me I heard Chloe's voice, no longer sweet or pitying, but sharp and panicked. "Maya, don't you dare!" she shouted. I kept walking. "Maya, you come back here. If you make a scene, if you ruin this for me, I swear." I reached the elevator bank and pressed the up button. "Don't you call Grandma!" Chloe's voice was getting closer, desperate now. "Don't you dare call Aunt Vi or Uncle Reginald and tell them some sob story. You hear me? Don't you ruin this! Don't you dare make me look bad!" Her words were a final, unintended confession. She wasn't worried about my feelings. She wasn't worried about me being alone or hurt. She was terrified that I would report her actions, that I would tarnish the perfect image she was presenting to her new, wealthy family. She was afraid of me having any power at all. The elevator chimed, and the polished brass doors slid open. I stepped inside. Chloe and my mother had stopped a few feet away, watching me, their faces a mixture of fury and uncertainty. They expected me to go to the lobby, to leave the hotel in a flood of tears. They expected me to run home and cry to my relatives. I just stood in the elevator and looked at them. The doors began to close, shutting out their shocked faces. Alone in the mirrored elevator, I did not cry. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I scrolled past Mom, past Chloe, past Aunt Vi. I opened a secure messaging app and found the name at the top of my list, Jamal. My fingers typed out a short, precise message. They just kicked me out of the reception. Activate the wedding gift. I paused, then added one more line. 7 p.m. sharp, as planned. I hit send. The message delivered instantly. As the elevator ascended, I felt nothing but a cold, quiet sense of purpose. The stranger had just sent her regards. The clock was now ticking. The elevator doors slid closed, sealing me in polished silence. My family, standing in the lobby below, thought I was defeated. They thought I was leaving the hotel, running home to my small DC apartment to cry. They were wrong. I pressed the button for the top floor, the penthouse level. The elevator ascended smoothly, lifting me far above the drama in the lobby. When the doors opened again, I wasn't in the main hallway. I was in a private, hushed foyer carpeted in thick velvet, with soft lighting and a single elegant desk. A concierge in a sharp uniform stood up instantly. "Good evening, Ms. Jackson," he said, his voice discreet and respectful. He didn't question my presence. He didn't look confused. He had been expecting me. "Good evening, Charles," I replied. "Is the suite ready?" "Of course, ma'am. We have your luggage inside and your preferences attended to." He handed me a sleek black key card. "The presidential suite. We hope everything is to your satisfaction." This was the first layer of my secret. While my mother was busy criticizing my little government job, I had been saving, investing, and building a life she knew nothing about. I could more than afford a suite that cost more per night than her monthly country club dues. I had booked it 2 months ago, the moment Chloe announced her wedding date. I knew I would need a sanctuary. I walked down the private hall, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It was magnificent. A 2-story wall of glass overlooked the entire Atlanta skyline on one side, and on the other, a perfect clear view down onto the terrace and the grand ballroom where my sister's reception was set to begin. I could see the guests mingling below, like tiny, perfect dolls. I walked past the grand piano, past the unlit marble fireplace, and picked up the phone. "Yes, room service. I'd like a bottle of Dom Perignon, the 2008 vintage, and the caviar platter, thank you." I kicked off my sensible heels, peeled off the navy dress my mother had found so awkward, and slipped into a simple black silk robe. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water while I waited for the champagne. I walked to the window, looking down at the party I had been banned from. The clock on the wall read 6:45 p.m. 15 minutes. The champagne arrived. I poured a glass, the bubbles rising in the crystal flute. I held it up, not in a toast to them, but to myself, to the stranger. "Let it begin," I whispered. It was exactly 7 p.m. Downstairs, the grand ballroom doors swung open. The room was breathtaking, a carefully curated fantasy of white orchids and dripping crystals. 300 of Atlanta's most influential people, politicians, hedge fund managers, and old money families, stood, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, their faces turned toward the aisle. The string quartet, which my mother had boasted cost more than my entire government salary, swelled into the bridal chorus. This was the moment, the apex of my mother's ambition and my sister's dreams. And there she was, Chloe. She was not just a bride. She was a spectacle. Her custom $30,000 gown seemed to float, catching the light from the dozens of chandeliers. Her veil trailed behind her, held by 2 small flower girls in matching white. She looked radiant, triumphant. She had won. She had secured the ultimate prize, Ryan Peterson, the wealthy, charming, well-connected man who would guarantee her a life of luxury and status. I watched all this from the window of my penthouse suite, high above them. I watched as Chloe beamed, locking eyes with her groom. But Ryan did not look like a man in love. He stood at the altar, sweating visibly under the lights. His smile was a tight, plastic grimace. While every other guest watched Chloe, Ryan's eyes kept darting down. He checked his phone, hidden in his palm. Once. Twice. He saw a message, and I saw his hand tremble slightly before he shoved the phone back into his pocket. He looked less like a groom and more like a man waiting for a verdict. Chloe reached the altar. She handed her bouquet to her maid of honor, completely oblivious to his panic. She looked up at Ryan, her eyes shining with adoration. Ryan forced his smile wider. He looked trapped. My father, beaming with pride, stepped forward and placed Chloe's hand into Ryan's. The music softened. The guests sat down with a collective rustle of expensive fabric. The officiant, a prominent local pastor whose presence alone was a status symbol, smiled benevolently at the crowd. He raised his hands. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice echoing through the silent, expectant room. "We are gathered here today, in the sight of God and this community, to join this man, Ryan, and this woman, Chloe, in holy matrimony." He had just launched into his speech about the sanctity of marriage when the first phone vibrated. The officiant's words about a sacred bond were still hanging in the air when the first disruption happened. It was not a loud ring, but a deep, powerful buzz. A vibration so strong it seemed to rattle the polished floor. It came from the front row. Senator Davies, Ryan's most important guest and a key investor, frowned. He slowly reached into his tuxedo pocket, pulling out his phone with an air of annoyance. He glanced at the screen. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. His face went ashen, his eyes widened, and he made a small gasping sound, as if someone had just punched him in the gut. He didn't silence the phone. He clutched it, staring at the screen as if it were a venomous snake. His wife leaned over, whispered something, and he just shook his head, his face pale. At the exact same moment, my mother Denise's designer handbag, sitting at her feet, began to vibrate violently. A sharp, insistent buzz. Denise flinched, her face contorting in rage. How dare someone interrupt this perfect moment? She discreetly nudged the bag with her expensive shoe, trying to silence it. It stopped for a second, and she flashed an apologetic smile at the officiant. But the moment the officiant cleared his throat to continue, her phone buzzed again, louder this time, a frantic, desperate sound. The guests in the second row could hear it. Denise, her smile frozen, fumbled for the bag. She pulled out her phone, her thumb angrily mashing the silence button. It wouldn't silence. It buzzed again, a new alert overriding her command. She stared at the screen, her brow furrowed in confusion. A news alert? From Bloomberg? Why was that coming to her phone? Before she could process it, another phone rang. This time it was Ryan's best man. Then, in the third row, an uncle. Then another, and another. Bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. It was no longer just one or two phones. It was a wave. A digital plague sweeping through the most important people in the room. A cascade of vibrations and soft chimes rippled from the front row to the back. The officiant paused, his words about love and fidelity dying on his lips. The air, once filled with reverent silence, was now thick with a growing, anxious hum. Guests were no longer being discreet. Phones were being pulled out of tuxedo pockets and designer clutches across the ballroom. The soft, polite glow of the chandeliers was suddenly competing with the harsh blue-white light of dozens of screens, illuminating faces frozen in disbelief. The whispers started, isolated at first, then merging into an undeniable rising tide of panic that drowned out the string quartet. "Oh my God, Bill, did you see this? a woman in the second row whispered, her hand clutching her pearls. What's going on? It's an alert from the Wall Street Journal. Mine is from Bloomberg, a man whispered back, his voice strained. Thornton Capital. It says it's under federal investigation. The whispers grew louder, less concerned with politeness. A Ponzi scheme? It says suspected Ponzi scheme. My God, my entire pension is with Thornton. Shut up, he'll hear you. Chloe, at the altar, finally realized this was not a minor interruption. Her perfect bridal smile faltered, twisting into confusion and then rage. What is wrong with everyone? She hissed to her mother in the front row. Tell them to put their phones away. This is my wedding. Denise looked frantic, her eyes darting not to Chloe, but to Senator Davies. But the senator was no longer looking at the altar. He was staring at his own phone, his face a mask of cold fury. He slowly, deliberately, stood up and without a word began walking toward the exit. His wife, looking utterly humiliated, scrambled to follow him. And Ryan just stood there, rigid. He was watching the senator leave, his own face slick with sweat. He looked like a man who had just watched his last escape route catch fire. He knew it was over. The officiant, looking pale and completely thrown off, cleared his throat and tried to regain control of the room. Ryan, he said, his voice straining to be heard over the whispers. Do you take Chloe to be your lawfully wedded wife? This was the moment. The cue for Ryan to say, I do. But Ryan didn't speak. He was frozen, his eyes locked on the phone of the guest in the third row, the screen clearly visible to him. He was reading the bright, flashing headline. Thornton Capital founder accused of multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Federal investigation underway. Chloe, oblivious, was still gazing at him, her bridal smile plastered on. Ryan? She prompted, her voice a little tight. Ryan's face, which had been slick with sweat, turned a horrifying pasty white. The color drained from his lips. He looked for a second like he was going to be sick right there on the altar. He made a small, choking sound. Ryan, Chloe said again, her voice now sharp with confusion. He took one, stumbling step back, pulling his hand away from hers as if he'd been burned. The guests fell silent, watching this new, unexpected drama. Ryan stammered. He looked at Chloe, then at the officiant, then at the sea of panicked, accusing faces in the crowd. He looked at Senator Davies, who was now at the ballroom exit, his face like thunder. I need a minute, Ryan whispered. And then he did the unthinkable. He turned, and he ran. He didn't just walk. He ran off the altar, pushing past a massive arrangement of orchids, and sprinted down the side aisle, heading for a service exit. For a full second, the entire room was frozen in absolute, stunned silence. Then Chloe's perfect, practiced composure shattered completely. It was not a ladylike scream. It was a raw, primal shriek of abandonment and fury that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Ryan! The entire room exploded. Guests leaped to their feet. The string quartet screeched to a halt, the final note of the bridal chorus hanging in the air like a bad joke. People were shouting, "What's happening? Did he just leave her? My God, it's true, the news is true." Chaos. Absolute, beautiful chaos. And from my penthouse suite, I watched it all unfold, sipping my champagne. I saw the tiny figure of the groom flee the ballroom, and I saw the wedding I was forbidden to attend implode in real time. The ballroom was pure chaos. Guests were standing up, shouting to each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and greedy excitement. This was better than gossip. This was a scandal unfolding live. Phones were held up high, recording everything. The beautiful string quartet was silent, the musicians staring wide-eyed, bows frozen mid-air. I watched from my penthouse window as Chloe stood alone at the altar, her veil slightly askew, her bouquet clutched to her chest. Her face was a mask of disbelief. This was not in the script. This perfect $30,000 moment was ruined. Then, her disbelief curdled into something else. Rage. "Where did he go?" she screamed, not at anyone in particular, but at the universe. She hitched up her massive gown, her movements no longer graceful, but sharp and frantic. My mother, Denise, finally unfroze. Her face was ashen, her eyes darting around at the recording phones, at the whispering guests. This was more than a ruined wedding. This was social annihilation. All her work, all her climbing, all her sacrifices, evaporating in front of 300 of Atlanta's most important people. "Chloe, stop!" Denise hissed, grabbing her arm. "We have to manage this. We need to make an announcement." "Manage what?" Chloe shrieked, ripping her arm away from our mother's grasp. "He left! He left me!" She didn't care about the guests anymore. She hiked up her skirt again and ran off the altar, shoving past the same flower arrangement Ryan had. She stormed down the side aisle, her face a terrifying mask of fury. "Ryan! Ryan Peterson, you get back here!" Denise, gathering her own shredded dignity, ran after her. "Chloe, wait! Don't make this worse!" I watched them both disappear through the service door Ryan had used. The guests, left alone in the ballroom, erupted into a full-blown roar of conversation. I knew where they were headed. The groom's private suite, just down the hall. I wished I could be a fly on that wall. I took another slow sip of my champagne. From what I could see, the wedding gift was being delivered perfectly. The service door slammed open, revealing a plush, private hallway. Chloe, hiking up her $30,000 gown with furious hands, ran ahead of her mother. She found the door to the groom's private suite and threw it open without knocking, the heavy wood crashing against the wall. "Ryan!" He was there. But he was not the calm, charming man from the altar. Ryan Peterson was a whirlwind of panic. His custom tuxedo jacket was thrown on a chair, his bow tie ripped off and discarded on the floor. He was frantically stuffing files and a laptop from his briefcase into a black leather duffel bag. He looked cornered, wild. "What the hell was that?" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You humiliated me! You left me! You left me at the altar in front of everyone we know!" "Shut up, Chloe," Ryan snarled, not even looking at her. He zipped the bag, his hands shaking so hard he could barely manage it. "Just shut up. I have to go. Now." Denise, my mother, pushed past her sobbing daughter. Her face was pale, but her eyes were blazing with a cold fury. "You are going nowhere, young man," she commanded. "You will march back into that ballroom, and you will fix this. Do you have any idea what you have just done to our reputation?" Ryan finally looked up, and the man they saw was terrified. "Reputation?" He laughed, a high, strangled sound that was terrifying. "That's what you're worried about? It's over. Don't you understand? It is over." "What is over?" Chloe sobbed, sinking onto an ottoman. "What are you talking about?" "They know," Ryan yelled, grabbing his coat. "The news alerts. That wasn't a rumor. The feds. The FBI is at my office right now. They're seizing everything. The accounts are frozen. They know." Denise grabbed his arm, her polished nails digging into his sleeve. "What do you mean they know? You told me this was handled. You told me it was just a minor issue with the SEC. You said it was creative investing." Chloe's head snapped up, her sobbing cut short. "Mom? What did you know?" Denise ignored her, her eyes locked on Ryan, her mask of composure finally cracking. "You promised me everything was stable." Ryan ripped his arm free, his face twisting in pure contempt. "Stable? You didn't want stable, Denise. You just wanted the checks to clear." He jabbed a finger at her. "You took my money. You knew it was questionable. You didn't ask a single hard question when I transferred $500,000 to your private account, did you?" Denise stumbled back as if struck. That was a gift. For Chloe. For the wedding." "It was a payoff!" Ryan roared. "A $500,000 payoff to get you to push this wedding through before I was indicted. To buy your family's good name as cover. You took the money, you spent it. You're an accomplice, Denise. You're in this just as deep as I am." Chloe's sobs hitched in her throat, choking her. She slowly turned her head, her tear-streaked face moving from Ryan, the man who had just abandoned her, to Denise, her mother. Her brain was struggling, trying to connect Ryan's furious words. $500,000, a payoff, to push the wedding. Mom? Chloe's voice was a small, broken whisper. It was almost inaudible, a child's voice. What is he talking about? What money? Denise's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She couldn't look at Chloe. She couldn't look at Ryan. She just stared at a point on the expensive wallpaper, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and sheer terror. He's lying, darling. He's desperate. He's just saying anything to hurt us, to make us look bad. Lying? Ryan barked out a laugh, a truly ugly, sharp sound. Am I lying, Denise? Ask her. Ask your mother to show you the statements for her private bank account, the one in the Cayman Islands. Ask her what that $500,000 wire transfer was for, dated just 2 days after I surprised you with the proposal. Chloe stood up slowly from the ottoman, her massive $30,000 dress suddenly feeling like a heavy, ridiculous costume. She took one step, then another toward Denise. Mom? She said again, her voice stronger now, sharp with a new, horrifying suspicion. You took money from him? You took $500,000? Denise finally looked at her daughter, her perfect composure completely shattered. She was cornered, and she knew it. It wasn't like that, Denise stammered, her manicured hands fluttering in the air like trapped birds. It was a gift, a wedding gift, for you, Chloe, to secure your future, to make sure you were taken care of no matter what. A wedding gift? Chloe repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. A $500,000 secret gift? A gift that you put in an offshore account? A gift that was dependent on me marrying him before he got caught? The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying, sickening speed. The relentless pressure from her mother to set a date, the way Denise had brushed off every small doubt Chloe had ever expressed about Ryan's intensity, his secrecy about his business, the constant refrain of, just lock him down, Chloe. A man like that doesn't wait forever. It wasn't about her happiness. It wasn't even about securing social status. It was a simple, dirty transaction. She was the product being sold, and her own mother was the broker. Ryan, seeing the scene he had created, just sneered. He slung the black duffel bag over his shoulder. Call it whatever you immoral, social-climbing nightmares want to call it, he spat. A gift, a payoff, a commission. I frankly don't care. It's over. We are done. Ryan's words, we are done, hung in the air of the groom's suite, a final, brutal verdict. Chloe was staring at her mother with dead, empty eyes, the full scope of the betrayal finally landing on her. Denise was gasping, her hand at her throat, finally speechless, realizing she had been outplayed by Ryan and exposed by her own greed. Ryan, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, sneered at them both. Enjoy explaining this to your society friends, and made for the door. But the door opened before he could touch it. No, not the suite door. Back in the grand ballroom, the main doors. The doors that 300 guests were staring at, expecting someone, anyone, to come out and explain the chaos. The massive oak doors burst open with a crash, slamming against the walls, the sound cutting through the hysterical chatter of the crowd. It was not the wedding planner. It was not the hotel manager. It was 4 men. 4 men in dark, identical, government-issue suits. They were not smiling. They moved not like guests, but like a unit, fanning out just inside the doorway, their eyes scanning the room with a cold, professional assessment. The air in the ballroom didn't just quiet, it was sucked out. Every guest, from the senators to the hedge fund managers, froze. The phones that had been gleefully recording Chloe's humiliation were now held in trembling hands, suddenly pointed at this new, terrifying development. This was no longer a social scandal. This was a federal event. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a grim face, ignored the abandoned altar. He ignored the five-tiered cake and the mountains of orchids. He walked directly to the trembling hotel manager, Mr. Henderson, who was plastered against a wall. The agent didn't raise his voice, but his words carried across the dead-silent room. "We are federal agents. We are looking for Ryan Peterson." Mr. Henderson, his face chalk-white, could only point a shaking finger toward the service hallway. He went that way. He ran to the groom's suite. The bride and her mother followed him. The lead agent nodded once, his eyes cold. He spoke into his radio. "He's in the North Wing suites, securing the exits." He motioned to two of his men, who immediately moved toward the same hallway Ryan had fled down. The other two agents remained, effectively sealing the ballroom. In the groom's suite, Ryan heard the heavy, running footsteps in the hall. He froze, his hand on the doorknob. The game was up. He was no longer a groom escaping a wedding. He was a criminal, and his time had run out. The heavy footsteps thundered down the hall and stopped directly outside their door. Ryan, frozen with his hand on the knob, didn't even have time to react before the door was kicked open, slamming against the wall with enough force to shake the artwork. Two federal agents filled the doorway, their expressions grim, their hands already on their belts. "Ryan Peterson," the lead agent commanded. Ryan tried to muster his charm, his last pathetic weapon. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Gentlemen, there seems to be a terrible misunderstanding. I was just on my way to talk to my lawyers." "You can talk to them from Central Booking," the agent said, stepping forward. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." He pulled out the handcuffs. Chloe let out a thin, sharp wail as the first cuff clicked shut around Ryan's wrist. "No! You can't! This is my wedding!" The agents ignored her completely. They cuffed Ryan's other hand behind his back, his expensive duffel bag dropping uselessly to the floor. "Which way out?" the agent asked his partner. "Main ballroom is closest to the service elevators, sir." "Then we go through the ballroom," the lead agent commanded. "I want every witness in there to see he is in custody." This was not a quiet, discreet arrest. This was a message. They pushed Ryan out of the suite and back into the main hallway. Denise and Chloe stumbled out after them, a grotesque bridal procession following the arrested groom. The doors to the ballroom were still wide open. The guests, who had been standing in confused, anxious groups, all turned as one. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. There he was, Ryan Peterson, the groom, in handcuffs, being marched through the center of his own reception by federal agents. The silence lasted for a single, horrified heartbeat. Then, every phone in the room was raised. Not just raised, but held high, the red record lights glowing in the dim, romantic lighting. Tiffany DuPont, the city's most ruthless society blogger, whom Chloe had personally invited to capture every moment, was already live streaming. Her voice was a gleeful, sharp whisper to her 500,000 followers. "You are not going to believe this, darlings. The wedding of the year is officially over. Ryan Peterson is being arrested. At the altar." The flashes from the phones were relentless, a strobe light of humiliation. And Denise stood there, frozen, watching it all. She wasn't just watching Ryan's arrest. She was watching the faces of her rivals. She saw Senator Davies' wife, who had always looked down on her, now watching with a cold, satisfied smirk. She saw the bankers, the politicians, the old money families, all capturing her family's absolute ruin on their iPhones. The money was gone. The status was gone. The reputation she had spent 60 years meticulously building, the reputation she had sacrificed her own daughter for, was not just gone. It was a joke, a meme, a cautionary tale that would be told at Atlanta dinner parties for the next 20 years. It was absolute, total, and complete annihilation. As the federal agents disappeared through the service exit with Ryan Peterson in tow, the ballroom descended into a new level of hysteria. Chloe let out a sound of pure, animalistic grief and collapsed onto the floor, her $30,000 dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. Guests were scrambling for the exits, shouting into their phones, trying to call their financial advisors, their lawyers, their spouses. The society blogger was still live streaming, her voice a breathless, excited commentary over the sounds of my sister's sobs. But my mother, Denise, was not looking at her sobbing daughter. She was not looking at the panicked guests. She stood frozen, her mind working furiously, connecting the dots, the timing, the precision, the public nature of it all. This was not a random investigation. This was an execution. Her eyes, wild and furious, scanned the room. This was sabotage, and there was only one person she had ever blamed for anything that went wrong in her life, one person who was an outsider, one person who had been unceremoniously kicked out just an hour before. Maya, she whispered, the name tasting like acid on her tongue. Then she screamed it. It was a raw, accusing shriek that cut through the chaos. Maya, that bitch! Maya, what did you do? Chloe's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face contorting with a new focus. Maya, she echoed, climbing to her feet, her gown tearing with a sickening rip. She did this! That ugly little bookworm did this to me! Denise, Chloe, and the few remaining shell-shocked relatives, Aunt Vi and Uncle Reginald, bypassed the crying guests and the flashing phones. They stormed out of the ballroom, a small, furious posse. They weren't just guests. They were a lynch mob. They scanned the opulent lobby, their eyes searching for me, expecting to find me crying in a corner or running for the exit. They didn't. They found me in the hotel's main bar, the Onyx Lounge. I was not in the penthouse. I had come down. I wanted a front row seat. I was sitting alone at the far end of the polished black marble bar, my back straight, my legs crossed. The simple navy dress that my mother had deemed awkward now looked like a statement of quiet, severe elegance. I was the only person in the entire hotel who was perfectly, completely calm. In my hand, I held a crystal glass, a martini, with one perfect olive. I had been watching the entire scene reflected in the mirrors behind the bar. I saw them storm in. I saw their frantic, searching eyes. I saw the moment they spotted me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, the gin cold and sharp, and turned my head to face them. They spotted me. The little group of four, Denise, Chloe, Aunt Vi, and Uncle Reginald, froze for a second, their frantic energy locking onto my calm. I didn't smile. I just met their gaze, took a final small sip of my martini, and placed the glass gently on the bar. Denise was the first to move. She didn't walk. She lunged. She stormed across the lounge, her emerald green dress dragging on the floor, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her diamonds heaved as she panted for breath, stopping just short of the bar. You! She shrieked, her voice no longer controlled or sophisticated, but a raw, guttural sound that made the bartender flinch. What did you do? Who did you call? You ruined everything! You did this! She slammed her manicured hands on the marble bar, the impact rattling my glass. You ruined my family! You ruined your sister! I turned slowly on the bar stool to face her fully. I said nothing. I just looked at her. I looked at the smeared makeup, the way her hair was escaping its perfect style, the pure desperation in her eyes. Mom, I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through her hysteria like ice. I didn't do anything. I'm just sitting here. I gestured with my hand to the empty bar. Having a drink, like a stranger should. The word stranger hit her again, and she recoiled, but her rage was too great. Don't you play innocent with me, you ungrateful little... You called them, didn't you? Chloe stumbled forward, her voice thick with sobs. Her $30,000 dress was torn at the hem, mascara streaming in black rivers down her face. She looked like a ghost of the radiant bride from an hour ago. She gripped the back of a bar chair, her knuckles white. "You called the FBI, didn't you?" she wept. "You were jealous. You've always been jealous of me. Jealous that I was getting this wedding, jealous that I had Ryan, jealous that I was happy. So you ruined it. You ruined my life." Aunt Vi and Uncle Reginald stood behind them, their faces pale. They looked horrified, not at me, but at the scene their perfect, elite family was making in the middle of a public hotel bar. The bartender was frozen, polishing a glass, pretending not to listen. A few other patrons at the far end of the lounge had their phones out, discreetly filming. My family, even in their ruin, could not escape an audience. Jealous? The word came out of me, not as a question, but as a genuine, cold curiosity. I actually laughed. It was a short, dry, humorless sound that cut through the lounge. "Jealous of what, Chloe?" Chloe stared at me, her mouth open, her sobs momentarily forgotten. She had no answer. She had always assumed jealousy was my primary motivator. "Let me be clear," I said, setting my martini glass down with a precise click. "Am I jealous of your $30,000 dress? It's beautiful, but it's not really my style." I looked at my nails, then back at her. "Am I jealous that you were, until an hour ago, the center of attention for 300 people? No. As you've both pointed out, I'm not really a large crowd kind of person." I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost pleasant tone. Or, "Am I jealous that you were about to marry a complete and total fraud? Am I jealous that your entire relationship was a business transaction designed to give a criminal a respectable cover? Am I jealous that you were about to tie your life, your name, and your future to a man who is currently being arrested for running a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme?" The word Ponzi hung in the air. Chloe's face went from tear-streaked to completely blank with shock. She didn't understand, but Denise did. My mother's eyes widened, her pupils dilating. I saw the flash of pure terror. Ryan had used that word. Accomplice. Indicted. You don't know what you're talking about," Denise stammered, but the mask was gone. This was pure, raw fear. "You're just saying things. You're making it up. How could you possibly know anything about Ryan's business?" She laughed, a desperate cracking sound. "You're a bookkeeper. You're just a little government accountant. You sit in a cubicle all day adding numbers. You don't know anything about high finance." "A little accountant," I repeated, nodding slowly. "A quen, as you might say. A boring, little accountant." I let the insult hang in the air, let them both cling to it as their last piece of solid ground. I let them see me as the small, insignificant, awkward failure they had always needed me to be. "That's where you're wrong, Mom," I said. "That's the part you never understood." "That's always been the problem, Mom," I said, my voice still quiet, but now it had a new edge, a precision that made her flinch. "You were never interested. You never actually asked what I do. You just assumed." I signaled the bartender for my check. "You heard government and accountant, and you created this entire narrative of me being a failure. A little accountant, as you so eloquently put it. You pictured me in a gray cubicle somewhere in the bowels of D.C., auditing travel expenses, bored and lonely." Denise's face was a mask of confusion. "But you are an accountant. You said—" "I am an accountant," I agreed, pulling my credit card from my clutch. "But there are different kinds of accountants, Mother. Just like there are different kinds of doctors. Chloe wanted to be a plastic surgeon, right? To make rich people look prettier. That's one kind." I signed the check, leaving a generous tip. I stood up from the bar stool, smoothing down my dress. For the first time, I felt taller than her. I'm not the kind of accountant who just adds numbers. I'm the kind of accountant who finds numbers. Numbers that powerful men like Ryan Peterson try very, very hard to hide. A flicker of genuine cold fear entered Denise's eyes. What? What are you talking about? I am a forensic accountant, I stated clearly, letting each word land. I work for the Department of Justice. My specific division? The White Collar Crime Task Force. Chloe just looked blank. The words meant nothing to her, but Denise knew. She knew what justice and white-collar crime meant. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? For the past 5 years, my job, the one you called boring and pathetic, has been to track, trace, and build cases against men exactly like Ryan Peterson. Men who build empires on stolen money. Men who run elaborate fraud schemes. Men who think they are too smart, too rich, and too well connected to ever get caught. I looked over at Chloe. I don't just add numbers, Chloe. I follow them. I follow them right to offshore accounts, fake shell corporations, and all the people they pay off. People just like Mom. Denise and Chloe just stood there, completely frozen. The blood had drained from both of their faces. All the color, all the life, all the righteous anger was gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening understanding. The lounge music, a soft jazz piano, suddenly seemed incredibly loud in the silence that had fallen between us. Chloe's hand was still gripping the bar chair, but she looked like she might collapse. Denise's mouth was open, moving slightly, but no sound was coming out. She was trying to form a word, no, or liar, but her brain had disconnected from her mouth. All those years, they had seen me as a quiet, awkward, harmless failure. A little accountant. And now, that failure was standing in front of them, holding a martini, and calmly explaining that she was the architect of their complete and total ruin. I looked at my mother's terrified face. I looked at my sister's blank, shattered expression. I raised my glass, as if in a silent toast. Then I delivered the final, fatal blow. And by the way, I said, my voice as calm as if I were discussing the weather, I wasn't just assigned to this case. I was the one who opened it. I have been personally tracking the Ryan Peterson investigation for the last 18 months. I took a final sip. The wedding gift had been delivered. 18 months? Chloe whispered. The words came out choked, disbelieving. You've been watching him for 18 months and you didn't say anything? Say what, Chloe? I asked, my voice genuinely curious. What would I have said? Hey sis, just a heads up, I think your new millionaire boyfriend is a massive fraud. When would I have told you? At the Christmas dinner where Mom wouldn't stop talking about the diamond bracelet he bought her? Or at the Easter brunch where you flashed your engagement ring? I shook my head, pushing the empty martini glass away. You wouldn't have listened. You didn't want to know. You two were so blinded by the money, by the status, by the idea of Ryan Peterson, you never stopped to ask if any of it was real. That's a lie, Denise hissed, her voice finding its strength again. Ryan was a successful, respected businessman. No, I countered, my voice sharp and precise, the voice I used when cross-examining a hostile witness. He wasn't. He was a rumor, a man with no verifiable history. That's what first caught my attention. It wasn't even his money, it was his gifts to you, Mom. Denise looked confused. My gifts? The bracelet, I said. The one you wore at Christmas. You bragged it was from a private jeweler in Geneva. I ran the jeweler's name. It doesn't exist. The private wire transfer he sent you for your birthday? It wasn't from a U.S. bank. It was routed through 3 different shell corporations, starting in the Cayman Islands. You see, Mom, you thought it was a status symbol. I saw it as a federal offense. That's my job. I let that sink in. I started the preliminary file on him right after that, just a quiet background check. And what I found was nothing. No college records, no early career. He just appeared in Atlanta 5 years ago, with a lot of money and a good story. Men like that don't just appear, they're manufactured. I turned my gaze to my sister, who was listening in dawning horror. He didn't want you, Chloe. He wanted our name. He knew he was being investigated. He was desperate. He needed a shield. And what better shield than marrying into the Jackson family? One of Atlanta's old money African-American families, with a father known for his community standing. He wasn't marrying you. He was buying your reputation to hide his crimes. And that brings us back to the real question, doesn't it? I asked, my voice dropping even quieter. I looked at Chloe, then at my mother. Why did you really try so hard to keep me away from this wedding? Chloe just stared, her mind clearly unable to keep up. I told you. I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable, I finished for her. Awkward? You didn't want me to shut down? That was the excuse, wasn't it? The lie you both agreed on? I shook my head, a small gesture of pity. No, that's not it. You've never cared about my comfort before. You've paraded my awkwardness at family events for 20 years. You enjoyed it. It made you both feel superior. So what changed? I leaned in. Why this time? Why was it so important, so critical, that I be nowhere near this event? I looked at my mother, who was now trembling, her face chalk white. I'll tell you why. Because you knew. You didn't know what he was, not specifically. You didn't know the name of the crime or how many people he'd hurt. But you knew he was shady. No, Denise whispered, her voice cracking. That's not true. Isn't it? I pressed. You knew the money was coming too fast. You knew the gifts were too expensive. You knew his stories didn't add up. You knew the $500,000 gift in your offshore account wasn't normal. You knew it was dirty. You didn't care, as long as it bought Chloe this spectacle. I let the accusation hang in the air. And that's why you couldn't have me here. Not because I'm awkward, but because I'm the boring little accountant. The one person in this family who actually looks at the numbers. The only one who might have seen Ryan for what he was. You weren't afraid I'd be uncomfortable. You were terrified I'd notice. I remembered when I was 22, home from college. My father's business was struggling. I'd looked at the household books for my mother, just to help out, and found thousands of dollars in undocumented expenses she was hiding from him. When I pointed it out, she'd slapped my face and told me to never, ever look at her private finances again. She knew exactly what I was capable of seeing. You weren't trying to protect me, I said to Chloe. You were trying to protect him. And Mom, she was trying to protect her $500,000 commission. Chloe finally broke. The weight of the lies, the arrest, and now this revelation was too much. He told me it was just a tax issue, she wailed, her hands covering her face, her whole body shaking. A disagreement with the IRS. He said it was normal for men at his level. He said he would handle it. He promised me. He promised you, I repeated, my voice devoid of sympathy. And you believed him. Because you wanted to believe him. You wanted the $30,000 dress and the Senate-level connections so badly, you decided not to look any closer. I turned my full attention back to my mother, who was now backed against a pillar, trapped by my words and her own guilt. And you, Mom. $500,000. That's a lot of money, even for you. It was a gift, she insisted, but her voice was weak, desperate. For Chloe, to set her up. To set her up, or to pay you off, I countered. This isn't the first time, is it? You've always found ways to get gifts to maintain this lifestyle. You call it social networking. My colleagues and I call it undisclosed compensation. I remembered all the commissions she had earned over the years. The consulting fee she got for introducing a developer to a city council member at one of her charity balls. The finder's fee from the art dealer after she convinced one of her wealthy friends to buy an overpriced, questionable painting. My father, a man of simple, old-school integrity, had built a respectable community reputation, but my mother had been using that reputation as a commodity for years. She was a social broker, trading access and influence for cash and favors, all to keep up the appearance of being old money elite. Ryan Peterson wasn't her first shady deal. He was just her biggest. "You've been selling this family's name for decades," I said quietly. "Ryan was just your largest payday. He wasn't just marrying Chloe, he was buying you, Mom, your connections, your social protection. And you were so blinded by the money you didn't realize you weren't dealing with a simple tax evader. You were dealing with a predator, and you let him right into our family." "Stop it," she whispered. "Stop it." "I can't stop it," I said. "I didn't start it, but I am finishing it." "I'm finishing it," I said, my voice resonating with the authority they had never heard from me. "I'm finishing it because while you were worried about your social status, Ryan was destroying lives. Real lives, Mom." Denise just shook her head, muttering, "No, no, no." "Yes," I insisted. "That $500,000 you hid in your secret account? Did you ever once ask where it came from? Did you care?" I didn't wait for an answer. "I did. That was my job. I traced it. That money didn't come from a creative investment. It was the entire retirement savings of Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. You know them, Mom. The Hendersons, from our church, the ones who run the community bake sale every year." Denise's hand flew to her mouth. She looked like she was going to be sick. "That wasn't all," I continued, my voice relentless. "There were 50 other families. Teachers from Chloe's old high school, small business owners in our own neighborhood. 50 families in this community who trusted Ryan with their life savings. And he stole it all. He stole their retirements, their children's college funds, their homes." Chloe let out a sound, a choked, horrified sob. This was no longer about a failed wedding. She was realizing she was the villain in a much larger, much darker story. "You weren't just an accomplice to creative accounting, Mom," I said, my voice dropping. "You were an accomplice to the financial ruin of your own community. You took blood money, you took it, and you hid it, all so Chloe could have a $30,000 dress." "Stop it!" Denise finally shrieked, her hands over her ears. "You're lying! You're just trying to hurt me! You hate me!" "I don't need to hurt you, Mom. The truth is enough." As my mother's words echoed, a new figure stepped into the lounge. He was calm, dressed in a sharp, dark suit, and had been standing quietly by the entrance, observing. He was African American, about my age, with a professional, no-nonsense demeanor. He now walked past the gawking patrons, past the frozen bartender. He walked past me, as if I weren't even there. He walked past the sobbing, ruined Chloe. He walked directly up to my mother, who was still muttering liar under her breath, and he stopped. He looked at her, his face impassive, and he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through every other sound in the room. "Mrs. Denise Jackson?" It was my colleague, Jamal, the head of the task force, and he was on the clock. Denise froze, her hand still fluttering at her throat. I don't understand," she stammered, her eyes darting between Jamal and me. Jamal's face was impassive. He didn't look at me. His entire focus was on my mother. "Mrs. Denise Jackson, we have several questions for you regarding wire transfers totaling $500,000 originating from accounts associated with Thornton Capital." He took a small step closer. "We also have questions about an undisclosed offshore account in the Cayman Islands. We need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding the knowing receipt of proceeds from a criminal enterprise." The official legal terminology hit her harder than any of Ryan's shouts. This wasn't a family argument anymore. This was a federal crime. "No," Denise whispered. Her eyes, wide with pure terror, finally snapped to me. The hatred was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading panic. "Maya," she gasped, her voice cracking. "Maya, please, do something. Tell them. Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them it was a gift." She lurched forward, her manicured hands grabbing my arm. Her grip was like a claw. Maya, you have to help me. Tell them. You're with the government. You work for them. You can fix this. Tell them I didn't know. This was the moment. The woman who had just 1 hour ago looked at me with such contempt, who had called me a stranger and an embarrassment, was now clinging to me. She was begging the boring little accountant to save her. Maya, please, she sobbed, her face crumbling. I'm your mother. You can't let them do this. We're family. You have to tell them we're family. I looked down at her hands on my arm. I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just a vast, cold emptiness. I very deliberately unhooked her fingers from my sleeve, one by one. I stepped back, putting a small, clean distance between us. I looked directly into her terrified, tear-filled eyes, the eyes of the woman who had called me a stranger. You're right, Denise, I said, my voice quiet, but it carried across the dead silent bar. Family is very important. Her face flooded with a pathetic, desperate hope. Yes, see? I gave her a small, cold smile. But you told me yourself. Strangers aren't allowed. Her hope froze, her face slackening in confusion. I held her gaze. And I don't know you. I don't know you. I said the words, and the sound of them hung in the silent bar. Jamal, my colleague, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He gently took my mother's arm. Mrs. Jackson, you need to come with us. Denise didn't resist. She was completely broken. All the fight, all the fire, all the arrogance that had defined her entire life was gone. She looked like a frail old woman, her emerald dress suddenly looking like a cheap costume. She let Jamal and the other agent lead her out of the lounge. She didn't look back. Chloe was still on the floor, huddled by the bar stool, sobbing. Not the loud performance sobs from the ballroom, but the quiet, gut-wrenching sobs of someone whose entire world has just ceased to exist. Aunt Vi and Uncle Reginald just stood there, pale and shaking, staring at me as if I were a monster. I picked up my clutch from the bar, my hands perfectly steady. Bartender, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. Could I close my tab, please? The bartender, who had been frozen in place, fumbled with the terminal. Yes, ma'am, of course. I signed the slip, walked past my weeping sister, past my horrified relatives, and out of the Onyx Lounge. I didn't go back to the penthouse. I walked out of the Four Seasons Hotel into the cool Atlanta night air, hailed a cab, and went straight to the airport. My work here was done. By the time I landed back in D.C. the next morning, the story had exploded. It was not just local news. It was national. Atlanta wedding day arrest. Thornton Capital founder, accused of massive Ponzi scheme. The footage was everywhere. The clips of Ryan being led away in handcuffs, juxtaposed with the opulent wedding decor. The shaky phone videos of Chloe screaming and collapsing. The society blogger's breathless livestream had become the primary source for every major news outlet. But that wasn't the headline that truly mattered. By noon, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had broken the real story, the one that connected everything. The headline read, "The Jackson Family Connection. Bride's sister, a DOJ forensic accountant, was the lead investigator." The story was a masterpiece of journalistic digging. It detailed how I, Maya Jackson, the quiet daughter, the accountant, had opened the file on Ryan Peterson 18 months prior. It detailed how I had meticulously built the case against him, all while my family planned the wedding of the year. The narrative was devastating. The Jackson name, once a pillar of Atlanta's old-money African-American community, a name synonymous with integrity and generational wealth, was now inextricably linked to fraud, greed, and a Ponzi scheme that had bilked their own neighbors. My father, a man who had spent his life on community boards and charity fundraisers, was ruined by association. His wife had been arrested for money laundering. His golden child, daughter, had been exposed as a social climber willing to marry a criminal. The Jackson family reputation was not just tarnished, it was incinerated. Several months passed. The media frenzy had died down, replaced by the slow, methodical grind of the justice system. The Atlanta Society pages, having feasted on the scandal, had moved on to newer, less devastating gossip. But for the main players, the consequences were just beginning. For Ryan Peterson, the end was swift. The case I had spent 18 months building was airtight. The evidence was overwhelming, a digital and financial breadcrumb trail that led directly to him with no escape routes. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable proof, the fake accounts, the wire transfers, the testimonies from victims, his legal team advised him to take a plea deal. But it barely mattered. He was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. He was facing up to 30 years in federal prison. His life as a charismatic, high-flying financier was over, replaced by the stark reality of a concrete cell. My mother, Denise, did not fare much better. Her initial arrest at the wedding had been just the beginning. The $500,000 in her undisclosed Cayman account was the nail in her coffin. It was the irrefutable link that changed her from a potential victim into a knowing accomplice. My testimony, along with the bank records I provided, proved she wasn't just a social climber blinded by wealth. She was a paid participant, a broker who had accepted a massive fee to help a criminal secure social cover. She was indicted by a grand jury on charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. The federal government froze every asset tied to her name. The grand house in the wealthy Atlanta suburb, the one my father's respectable name had secured and her ambition had decorated, was seized. The luxury cars, the designer wardrobe, the art collection, all of it was tagged as proceeds of or purchased with criminal funds. She was released on bail, but she had nowhere to go. She had lost everything: her house, her friends, her money. But worse than that, for her, was the loss of her name. In Atlanta society, she was now a pariah. The same women she had competed with, the same charity boards she had dominated, now shunned her. She was a social outcast, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very country clubs she had once ruled. She had lost the only thing she had ever truly valued, her status. And then there was Chloe, my golden child sister. Her fate was, in many ways, the most tragic. She wasn't a criminal, not in the legal sense. She was just collateral damage. In the wake of the scandal, she was left with absolutely nothing. Ryan's credit cards, which she had been living on, were declined. The lavish condo they shared was seized by the federals. The wedding gifts, all of which were still piled in the hotel ballroom, were impounded as potential assets purchased with fraudulent funds. She was left with only her personal belongings. And her name, a name that was now synonymous with the biggest scandal Atlanta society had ever seen. She was a social pariah overnight. The same friends who had vied to be her bridesmaids now crossed the street to avoid her. The society bloggers who had once praised her style now wrote scathing articles about her, painting her as either a naive fool or a willing participant. She was uninvited from every charity board, every junior league committee, every social event she had ever attended. She was radioactive. With no money and no connections, her perfect life evaporated. I heard from Aunt Vi, in a rare gossipy phone call, that Chloe had been seen at a high-end consignment shop selling her designer handbags and shoes, one by one. The $30,000 wedding dress, which she had never even gotten to wear to a reception, was reportedly sold for a fraction of its cost just to pay for a deposit on a new apartment. She had to move out of the seized condo and into a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a part of town she once would have called undesirable. No doorman, no pool, no status. I pictured her there, alone, surrounded by the last vestiges of her former life, and I felt a small, strange pang of pity. But the worst part for her, I imagined, was the realization. The moment it must have truly hit her. She wasn't Ryan's beloved partner. She was his cover. She wasn't our mother's prized creation. She was her primary commodity. She had spent her entire life being the perfect daughter, only to realize she was just a pawn in Ryan's criminal enterprise and a bargaining chip in our mother's desperate, greedy climb up the social ladder. She had been sold, and she hadn't even known the price. I returned to my office at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. It wasn't a small, gray cubicle. It was a spacious, private office with a view of the Capitol, an office I had earned through years of relentless, difficult work. The news of the Atlanta wedding scandal had, of course, reached my colleagues. But here, it was different. Jamal, my boss, just put a fresh cup of coffee on my desk. "Good work, Jackson," he said. "You closed the case. That's all that matters here." And that was the truth. The narrative my family had built around me was a complete fiction, a story they told themselves to make their own choices seem superior. I was never awkward Maya. I was focused Maya. I was never antisocial. I was observant. My silence at those dreadful family dinners, the awkwardness my mother was so ashamed of, was never social anxiety. It was profound, soul-crushing boredom. I couldn't engage in their superficial small talk. I couldn't bring myself to care about which new car my uncle bought or which country club Aunt Vi was joining. While they were discussing designer labels and vacation homes, my mind was tracing complex money laundering schemes across 3 continents. While they were judging my boring government job, I was preparing cases that would put men far richer and more powerful than them in prison. My silence wasn't weakness. It was my weapon. I was an observer. I watched them. I saw their petty jealousies, their desperate social climbing, their complete lack of moral character. They weren't just shallow. They were, in many ways, fundamentally corrupt, long before Ryan Peterson ever entered the picture. They just operated on a smaller, legal but unethical scale. They thought I was the failure, but I had been judging them my entire life. I sat at my desk, looking at the case file for Thornton Capital, now stamped in red, closed. It was my biggest case to date, and it was finished. I stood in my apartment, high above Washington, D.C. The view from my window wasn't just of the city, it was of the Capitol dome, glowing white against the twilight sky. My home was quiet, ordered, and peaceful. It was everything my childhood home had never been. The thin, flimsy letter from the Atlanta County Jail felt out of place in my hand. I opened it. The handwriting was messy, rushed, and stained with what looked like tear marks. "Maya," it began, "I know you have every reason to hate me forever. I know I deserve this. I was a fool. I was so blinded by what Mom wanted, by what Ryan promised. I never stopped to see what was real. I see it now. I see how I treated you. I was jealous, Maya. I was always so jealous that you were smart, that you were real, and that you didn't seem to care what anyone thought of you." I paused, reading that line again. Jealous of me. The irony was bitter. "I'm going to pay for what I did," the letter continued. "But Mom, she's not like us. She's falling apart in here. She won't survive. They're going to make an example of her because of what Ryan did. You're the only one who has any power. Please, Maya, I'm not asking for me. But please, can you help her? Can you get her out? She's still our mother." Our mother. I folded the letter. She was still trying to pull me back, still trying to use the word family as a lever. I looked at the letter, at Chloe's desperate plea to save the very woman who had orchestrated our mutual ruin. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Jamal's contact. I could have forwarded him the letter, adding a note. "Evidence of conspiracy. Looks like the mother-daughter relationship is breaking down. Might be useful for the prosecution." But I didn't. I scrolled past his name. I went to my professional contacts and found the name of the top defense attorney in Atlanta, a man I knew from a previous unrelated case. A shark. I dialed. He picked up on the second ring. David? I said, my voice all business. It's Maya Jackson. I have a recommendation for you. A new client. I paused, looking out at the Capitol, at the seat of law and justice, a world where I belonged and they did not. My sister, Chloe Jackson, she's in Atlanta, and she's going to need a very good lawyer to start over. I listened for a moment. No, I won't be involved personally. Just give her your best rate. Thank you. I hung up. I had done it. One final act. Not of forgiveness, not of love, but of closure. I had given Chloe the tools she needed to build her own life, separate from our mother's influence. I had given her a chance, the one thing our family had never given me. But I was not getting involved. I would not pay her bills. I would not post her bail. And I would certainly not save Denise. My mother had called me a stranger, and as a stranger, I owed her nothing. I picked up the letter from Chloe and walked over to my fireplace. I watched the flames turn the desperate plea to ash. I was free. I was successful. And I was, finally, at peace. This story shows the danger of valuing appearance over integrity. Maya's family, obsessed with social status and wealth, embraced a criminal, Ryan, because he looked successful. They excluded Maya because she seemed boring and didn't fit their image. But Maya's boring job was her secret weapon. While they were busy planning a party, she was busy doing her job, investigating the very fraud they were benefiting from. The lesson is that true power lies in substance, not in perception. The quietest person in the room is often the most observant and ultimately the most powerful. Have you ever been the Maya in your family, quietly observing while everyone else underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below.